Welcome to Season 3 of the Building Interest podcast presented by Leader Bank. In our last season, we explored what it means to be a leader through conversations with leaders from within the communities we serve, as well as from across the world of banking and technology. Each conversation focused on our guest's personal leadership journey, provided insights on what it means to be a good leader. In our last episode, we were joined by Vitaly Schaefer, Director of Startup Technology and Venture Capital Banking here at Leader, and Aaron Beydoun, who holds several leadership positions within Greater Boston's innovation and technology landscape, to understand their entrepreneurial journeys and the challenges they've overcome as leaders within their segments. Today, I'm pleased to be joined by Leader Bank's President, Jay Tuli, to reflect on the past year in banking and finance, understand how we navigated change during a volatile year, and his own plans for 2024. Welcome back, Jay.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Good to be back.
Indeed, yeah. Have a good time over the holidays. Did you do anything fun?
Yeah. We were traveling out of the country for a little bit, and it was great. It was great, busy, but I'm actually excited to be back into the routine of things at work.
Yeah, it's good to get away and good to come back. So, well, let's talk about what you're coming back to, right? So last year was obviously a bit rocky in the banking world. We did touch a little bit on this in some of our episodes. We talked with our CFO, Brian Taylor, about navigating the current banking environment a couple episodes back. We obviously saw some changes in the bank world with some failures earlier in the year. How do you as a leader approach sort of those challenges where you're the figurehead of Leader Bank and we have these unexpected events that impact the financial industry, and how do you approach leading through those times?
Yeah, last year was like a really interesting year. I mean, I don't need to go through again like all the things that happened in the banking crisis, but it was certainly there were many moments where it was just scary. I think that's probably the word I would use when the bank opened after SVB. The SVB failure, I think I was scared. I think a lot of banking execs were, because we didn't know how clients were going to react. Did everyone want to come and pull their money? Were they going to be nervous? And so that unknown was kind of like the wild card. And I was saying this to the team. I think last year was such a hard year in many ways for banks, because we all had, in addition to the failure of several banks, we all saw, not all, but many banks saw their margins squeeze, deposits left the system, investments lost value, all this type of stuff. But at the same time, it was such a good year as far as doing the things you need to do, but you just don't get around to, like creating the good corporate habits, cleaning up processes, re-engineering certain tasks, and really focusing on the few things that matter versus doing like so many things. From that perspective, I think 2023 was such a productive year. And to your question about like how do you navigate that, I think it's a lot of it is like going through, okay, what's the worst thing that can happen? Because in the outset, there's so much to think about. There's so much to worry about at any one point in time. And then sometimes you have to take a step back and say, okay, like what really matters? What's the worst thing that can happen? And what are the options available to us should those things happen?
Well, you mentioned clients reacting and clients potentially pulling their money, right? Which makes you afraid as a leader in the bank. Are there things that we can proactively do to reassure that, or is it really just you have to let the wild card be the wild card, and then, as you said, focus on perhaps other initiatives so we come out stronger regardless of what the client does?
Yeah, there's a lot of things we can do, and some of the things we did during that time is we started communicating a lot. We started communicating a lot to our clients directly. But actually, one thing we did a lot of is we communicated a lot to our team, because the team at the end of the day is the one talking to the clients.
Right.
And the more they know, the better they can communicate it. And in fact, the more they know about why what happened the way it happened and how we're positioned in the specifics, the more confidence they can instill in the client. And so it wasn't only just communication. A lot of it was education too, because some of these are like kind of esoteric, like investment and balance sheet concepts that, the average person wouldn't know if they're not in banking. So we had to both explain what's going on macro, why that happened, what that means for leader, why we feel we're in a good position, why their money's safe. So all of those things. So we did a lot of communicating. I think that really helped actually. And we sort of took the approach that like if a client needs us to hop on a Zoom and talk to them, let's do it. So let's just over communicate. And I think that really helped.
Well, that was kind of going to be my next question. We tout modern banking and personal touch, and obviously the personal touch is key in what you just said. Really communicating through our teams to our clients what's happening and what's going on. But yeah, leveraging technology in that, and you mentioned Zoom. Any other kind of strategies or tech that really helped mitigate maybe customer fears or things on our end?
Yeah, I think like, the communication's a lot easier, obviously, nowadays. Zoom, like you said, putting things on the website, texting, emailing. We did all of these different types of things. That is obviously a lot easier than if your major form of communication is for the client to walk into a branch. And so yeah, so that certainly helps.
So we talk a lot about innovation, right? And the definition of innovation is utilizing a new idea or a new method. Does that mean we're effectively trying to change in a new or new better way how people bank? I mean, banking itself is a financial transaction. Money goes in, money goes out. Are we really, is that what we're doing? We're changing how people bank, so how their relationship with their bank functions?
All right, yes. To your point on that question, I think we're just trying to, in whatever ways we can and we're able, to continue to make banking more convenient and a better experience for the clients. Sometimes that means adding more tech. Sometimes I think that means taking away tech,
Interesting.
you know,
What's an
like,
example of that?
well, an example of that is like, in times of uncertainty, you could say, yeah, let's just send lots of emails. Let's just put up pop-up banners on the mobile banking app explaining everything's okay. But that's a lot of tech, right? But there's certain times where the best thing is just to call the client, like just pick up the phone and talk to them. Like just get on a Zoom. Zoom is tech, I guess, but point is just
Understood.
communicate. Or if you can meet them in person, meet them. We did a lot of that, right? So there are examples where tech is great, but when it comes to trust, sometimes you just need to skip all that and just get like back to basics. And I think 2023 was like a reset year in many ways, where I feel like in financial services, the reset button was pressed. And it's like, let's get back to basics of what matters, like safety and soundness and relationships. And tech can be helpful sometimes, and sometimes tech can get in the way. But those are the things that mattered, and that was what we were really trying to focus on.
No, and I do hear that. I have friends that complain about, the banking experience they have wherever they're at. And I kind of laugh and I go, well, why don't you bank at a community bank? And they're like, oh, well, they can't do this, that. And I'm like, yeah, they can. And I think that that's exactly that. When you have that relationship and you can establish that we can do all those things, but we can also take care of people directly, that's huge. So I love your answer there. I want to throw out a couple of sort of factoids or achievements that we have, and these are from our own website, little news blurbs that we threw out throughout the year in 2023. Again, kind of to recap some awesome things that we did. Then I want to get your take on a little twist there. Once again, we were named a top place to work by the Boston Globe. We've done this a couple of times. This is a really amazing achievement. We launched the venture capital, private equity, and technology banking group that I mentioned that we had done a podcast episode with previously. We took these tough times that we just talked about, and we remained well capitalized, and we kept our clients stable and safe and did not lose anybody's money. We expanded our markets in a down year and opened 2 new full-service residential lending offices in Cape Cod and in Holden. There's a lot to talk about that we achieved in 2023. My question to you is there an achievement from 2023 that doesn't make the statistics, that doesn't make the press release, that's something that's somehow against all odds, the one thing that you're really proud of that we did that doesn't show up in the news blurbs on the website?
That's a really good question. In a time like that, I think it would have been like last year, very easy to get distracted from the client. Meaning, there's so much stuff going on and you're running around like trying to fix things and whatever. And I think last year we did an exceptional job with upping our client service. I don't even think it was like the same as the year before. I think we brought it up a notch. And I'm super proud of that because at the end of the day, that's all that matters. Is like how focused can we be on the client and delivering what they need to them. And to add to that, I think last year, the other bucket, though related, that I'm really proud of is I feel like we added a lot of new muscle to what we're capable of doing. So what I mean by that is like we added like new risk management muscle, new marketing, new tech muscle, pricing, different capabilities and things we can do for the future that we kind of built last year that we never had before. That's just going to make us a better organization. And I think a lot of those things kind of reinforce sort of allowing the client to stay at the center. But what you're seeing in all those things you mentioned, those are all great achievements. And I'm really pleased that they happened last year. I feel that they are a byproduct of being focused on the client, and then these other things kind of like came around it.
No, that's a great way to put it because we know that we want to be client focused, and that's never going to be a press release. Oh, Leader Bank is client focused. We're never going to put that out in the news. But like you said, all these achievements happen because we have that underneath. I think that's a fantastic answer, and I wasn't sure where you were going to go. I knew you'd have something that you'd come up with, but that was really good answer. I love that. As we're kind of going off the sort of official 2023 topic a little bit, then maybe let's talk a little bit more personally. What drives you? What motivates you as a leader personally when you see all this adversity rather than just throwing in the towel or, like you said, maybe business as usual, we focus on all the problems. What makes you wake up and go, today I'm going to go achieve something? Or is that just innate?
No, I don't know. I think I would say a couple things. Like one, when we think about how many people we are working with and helping every day, it's awesome. We're so fortunate to be able to help so many like new people buy homes every day. So many businesses like make their payroll or buy a property or a machine or like whatever it is they're doing that's vital to their business, which then employs people. So I think the backwards reflection for me is really motivating. And I think one thing is like, we're a new bank. So like a lot of us have been here, 10 plus years, 20 years, since the bank was founded. And whenever I read a few books last year that were really talking about like the power of reflection. And I find that really motivating because when you look back and you see the progress that's made and you think through all the people that are benefiting from this journey, it's incredibly motivating. It's not just the clients either, it's all the team members. And when we kind of think about how focused we are on being being helpful to the client, and you hear their feedback like, wow, that was amazing. I could have not done this without you. I've never had an experience like this. Incredibly motivating. You know, the other like thing from last year for me that's kind of like going into 2024 is this kind of concept about like how much we can push ourselves. You know, like you think you're capable of like only X, and then you're thrown into like a challenge like last year, and then you're like, oh wow, like capable of a lot more.
I feel like
What?
this is a recurring theme for us. We had COVID and we
Yeah,
had to
yeah,
respond to
right,
that, and PPP loans, and we got thrown into that. And
right.
yeah,
You're right. And then when you come out of that, you're like, wow, what else are we capable of? Personally, professionally. Um, and so that's something that I'm curious about. And I think like this whole notion of like, can we go deeper? Um, can we get more, can we go deeper as far as like the impact we're providing to clients, to team members, for me individually. Um, so it was a great year of reflection, 2023. It was a really hard year, and like that's why at the same time it was a really great year of
I,
reflection and learning.
I think that's really powerful. This idea that even if we are perhaps struggling a little bit as an industry, not necessarily as a company individually, but as an industry as a whole, to go back and look and say, hey, but we still helped all these people. I love that. That's a great approach. I want to go back for a second. You mentioned reading some books. Any particular place that you go to find what's the next great inspirational read? Like, I often want to read cool inspirational books, and I don't even really know where to start. Where do you
Yeah.
go to find the next great read that motivates you?
I don't know, just like random things that are suggested by friends or I hear on podcasts. I'm really into one podcast right now, which is called the Founders Podcast,
Yep, I'm familiar
which
with it.
it's by David Senra, and he basically does a podcast on a person each episode, and it's like all the great entrepreneurs, all the great, even athletes, even uh, going back decades ago, and you kind of really go deep on a person and their journey. And so like I've picked up a lot of interesting books to read from that or learnings. Um, but yeah, I don't know if I have one place, Greg, and um for me last year was all about, okay, I need to stay positive. And so yeah, like it's one more thing on the motivating piece of it. I think one other thing is like as an industry, we're all going through it together. And I think just reminding ourselves like when you're in it with a lot of other people or organizations, like there's a community to that as well. And that's calming. And you kind of want to like get out of it together, you know?
Right.
And so I think that's really important. Like, this concept of like, no matter what you're feeling or how hard it is for you, others are in the same boat. You're not alone.
Right.
And so I would talk to a lot of other bankers and a lot of other people I knew in different organizations, not even in banking, outside of banking. And like, when the Fed's raising rates 5 points in like a year, everyone's going to feel it.
Yeah,
There's nobody
absolutely.
that's not going to feel that, right? You could be in manufacturing, you're going to feel it. You can be in a different
Yep.
country, you're going to feel it. So,
Everybody's going to feel it. And even though technically we're all competitors, ultimately we wouldn't exist without that
yeah,
competition. We sort of all need each other
yeah,
to exist and provide a competitive service.
yeah, that's true.
Um, you mentioned earlier sort of pushing beyond and maybe discovering new things that you didn't know you were capable of. Did you have any personal milestones or achievements in the last year that you set out a goal that maybe you didn't think you could get to and broke through? Or maybe something you want to do for 2024?
Yeah, I mean, for 2024, yeah, I'm definitely like on this theme of like, okay, I want to be better personally and professionally. I want to be better every day. So, okay, what does that mean? And I've found out for myself that I need to wake up early. Like that's just like a fact for me. Like if I wake up early, I generally will have a good day. So then it's like, okay, well, how can I keep waking up early? Um, what else can I do that if I push myself, it'll have multiple benefits. So obviously exercise is one thing that's important to me. And I'm trying to find a format to sort of up the ante this year. So I signed up for this like crazy hike in Sun Valley in June. So I'm kind of training for that right now. But that's giving me some focus for my sort of like exercise routine. Um, I think professionally too, like um, really thinking about how we can push the organization in ways that might even seem unreasonable to others. But for us, it would quote unquote like widen our moat. You know, it would provide a competitive advantage. And I go back to client service. I keep going back to that because I think that is at the root for us. And it's kind of like what would be an unreasonable thing we could put as a standard for Leader Bank that others would it would be difficult for them to replicate.
It's only unreasonable because no one's doing it, not
Right,
because no one can do it.
right, exactly,
Is that what I'm
exactly.
hearing you
Yeah,
say?
exactly, exactly.
That's interesting. I mean, I have this question I keep asking myself, and you've kind of already answered it here, this question of what makes you better. And you started by having identified that getting up early makes
Yeah,
you better. And it's the little decisions like that. It might not be what made you better was going to a particular class or starting a particular product or anything like that. What makes you better might be just that one little personal moment.
yeah,
And then from that, everything trickles out.
yeah. I mean, just to connect a couple of the questions you've asked now, coming full circle, like, one unreasonable thing that I don't think is unreasonable, but is all right, can we answer the phone when someone calls within 30 seconds or less and wait time? And then connecting to the low tech component of that, like without a voice prompt, without
Right.
a touch, just pick up the phone when they call, you know, and that's what we strive to do.
And
And
that's so
it,
huge because how often do you pick up the phone and you end up in an endless call tree and you keep
yeah,
yelling operator into the phone louder and
yeah,
louder as if the computer cares that you're yelling and you
yeah.
never end up getting to the representative.
And personally, I think that's like that would be a great goal for all community banks to rally around. Because
Sure.
at the end of the day, as a community bank, we're smaller, so all we really have is like we have to outcompete on service, you know. And so if we're not, then then it's kind of harder to compete against the bigger banks in many ways in certain aspects of banking. But we should have the service nailed down. We should be raising a higher bar on that. And so I think that's one of the things we're striving to do. And a lot of community banks are trying to push the envelope on service as well.
Definitely. And I think that it's clear that those complaints of companies that aren't meeting those kind of goals definitely shines through a lot more. I mean, not to single them out, but in the larger companies where it is a more technological call tree type organization and you can't always get right through. And like you said earlier, calling our clients directly and having that Zoom chat and talking to them about where Leader Bank's at and where the client is at. These are huge moments for them to feel that trust and where we can go beyond.
Absolutely.
So I want you to imagine a world where banking doesn't exist. There is no such thing as banking. Now, what does Jay Tuli look like if he's not running a bank? Would we see Jay Tuli the turnip farmer? Would we see Jay Tuli the professional basketball player? Like what does an alternate universe look like where your same skills, your same drive, your entrepreneurial spirit is all there, but you don't have a bank to work at? What do you do? Do you ever sit at home and go, man, in this other universe, I could have grown up to become this?
I wish I was good enough to be like a basketball player.
Really?
I
I just
wish
threw
I
that in
was.
there randomly.
I wish no, no. Oh, I thought you. No, I wish I was like, taller, faster, all that stuff. Because I think, and I am playing a lot more basketball now with friends, and I love it. I'm not that great, but I love it. And I wish I was better at it because I just think there's so many things in it. Like, and then this just goes with all like team sports, but like there's strategy, there's work ethic, there's team play, there's um, habits are important. Like all of these things, which is kind of like I feel like a lot of them are also relevant to company building as well. But yeah, I just think that would have been so fun, but maybe in another universe. Yeah.
No, and that's exactly kind of why I do these kind of thought exercises, because I think the same thing. Like all of the same skills that make us good at what we are today could potentially be the same skills that make you good somewhere else. And like you mentioned about the Founders Podcast, just because you're in a different industry doesn't mean that you don't have the same sort of ultimate drive and skills. And like you said, you have to be savvy, you have to understand teamwork, you have to collaborate, but you also have to be strong and driven individually. And you see that in the greats, whether they're turnip farmers or basketball players.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
But no turnip farming for you.
No turnip farming for
That
me,
was too
no.
random.
No, I don't have the patience.
Any other thoughts you want to throw out for us for last year recap, or looking forward to
I would
next
say
year?
like I've never been. I think and I feel like I say this every year.
We can
Um,
always check. We did have
we
you on
could
about a
chat,
year ago.
yeah, but I've never been more excited for community banking. I just think like the the need for it is so strong, and yet the number of community banks continues to decline. And if you see what's happening in the way organizations and people bank, is it's getting more and more specific. Like if you're a law office, you bank very differently than if you are uh, a doctor's office, which banks very differently than from a convenience store. So there's all these like very specific banking needs. So in a way, like there should almost be more community banks, but there's less. And so I feel there's such an opportunity for smaller banks like us to come into a market, really do a great job with clients, up the ante on client service. And even with the tech, what's interesting about it is every year the tech becomes more and more available and more cheaper to the masses. Like it starts off unique and very expensive, but every year it just becomes easier and easier and easier, right? Like so um I think it's a wonderful thing. I'm excited about us. And I would say like the other thing about Leader Bank that I'm really proud of, just to add to your question before, like what doesn't make the headlines, I would say the composition of our team and like the talent we are able to recruit nowadays is really for me like very exciting and motivating. It's not just the new talent either. It's existing talent saying, okay, I'm going to learn this new skill. I note that this is a weakness of mine. I'm going to work on it and make it better. Like I just feel like we are constantly raising the bar on our talent pool, and we're able to do more and more as a result.
Absolutely. I think that's very well said. Speaking of our talent pool, I think I want to take this opportunity to thank Sydney Clapp and Ryan McNulty in the background here, patiently listening to our conversation, and they're going to edit this all down and make a wonderful product that's ultimately going to be what our listeners hear. And we wouldn't have this podcast if it were not for them. So I want to shout that out, just as you're mentioning our wonderful team. Thank you guys for that. Um, that's really all I have, Jay. If any other thoughts or questions you have, and then let's jump into 2024.
Thank you. Thanks, Sydney, Ryan, Greg. Good job. Excited for next year.
For more information on today's subject, visit leaderbank.com. In addition to past episodes, you can also find our corresponding blog entries for more insights. This podcast is a production of LeaderBank NA, Equal Housing Lender, member FDIC, NMLS number 449250.